ECIC, your export risk partner.
Most of sub-Saharan African economies are interlinked with what is happening with the rest of the world. Whenever there's an uptick in the US, in Europe, and other emerging economies that we trade with, especially China, there is a possibility that African economies will also pick up. But the problem within sub-Saharan Africa is us trading amongst ourselves instead of depending on trading with other countries. Because what has been happening is that intra-regional trade has been very constant over the years at around 12–13%, and that hasn't been increasing. Where it has been increasing, it's only in key economies which have been dominating regional economic communities. Let me just give you an example. In East Africa, most of the benefits of intra-regional trade are going to Kenya. You look at Southern African Development Community, that is SADC, most cross-border trade is dominated by South Africa. And also you look at the West, again, intra-regional trade is dominated by Nigeria in West Africa. So there is that economic polarization that we need to shift. And what is much more important is we've been importing quite a lot of capital equipment and industrial commodities from the rest of the world, whereas we're not manufacturing those ourselves. We need to look into that direction and start industrializing our economies, and we can have some productive capabilities in those sectors where we're importing quite a lot.
Would you say that industrializing certain regions would also break down those monopolies that you just mentioned and allow other players to get involved in the export industry? Most
definitely. We need to build those regional value chains based on our competitive capabilities. This can be country specific. Let me just give you an example. There's a possibility, let's say in the clothing and textile sector, that South Africa might be competitive in a particular segment of the clothing and textiles industry, and you have other countries within the region, Lesotho, Botswana, Swaziland, which can be quite competitive in the inputs that goes into manufacturing clothing and textiles. If we can build those regional value chains, I believe that other countries will have the potential to build their productive capabilities and industrialize their economies.
Now, transporting all the things that are created through these value chains must be a challenge. Talk to us a little bit about the current state of the transport networks that exist and how ECIC deals with those.
That's a big problem, especially here in the continent. Transportation costs are the highest cost in the production cost or in the export cost of most companies or exporters or whoever is doing business in the continent. And what governments have been doing is to focus much more on land transportation, that is rail and road. And currently, across the continent, even here in South Africa, road carries quite a lot of commodities than rail. And there's been a move by state-owned enterprises to move cargo from road to rail. I'm not saying that we shouldn't shift focus on land transportation, but there is a big opportunity in the maritime economy, the ocean economy. It is much cheaper, it's environmentally friendly. If we can build that sector and move commodities on our vessels owned and registered here in the continent, we can be able to build that transportation sector in order to complement what is happening inland.
What are some of the key strategies that ECIC is working on to deal with some of these various challenges that you've mentioned, particularly when trying to introduce the maritime transportation network as an alternative to the traditional networks?
Okay, let me talk on the trade aspects first, because that's where we come in as the ECIC. Then I'll also talk about the infrastructure elements, implementation on the ground. When it comes to cross-border trade, we've realized that there's lots of opportunities here in the continent, and as the ECIC, we've moved from being passive to being proactive in the market, where we've been trying to identify trade and investment opportunities for local exporters and investors. And what we do is to go out there as the ECIC, interact with the business on the ground, interact with government on the ground to get their procurement drive, and also talk to companies about where they're lacking in terms of access to funding and the likes. And we come back home, and wherever we have an appetite, be it in a particular sector or in a particular country, we convey that message to South African entities. We have an appetite for a particular country, we have an appetite for a particular sector, and we as the ECIC, we should be able to support you to enter into that market. We also liaise with the Department of International Relations and Cooperation and the Department of Trade and Industry to ensure that our local companies are able to seize those opportunities. On the infrastructure side, definitely there are problems in moving cargo, and we've been able to participate in a number of projects in building roads and other infrastructure that will facilitate cross-border trade. We've also introduced products that will also enhance or be able to support movement of cargo. One product that I can mention is lease and return of plant, whereby South African companies can be able to lease either locomotives or any other equipment that will ensure that, or that will enable cross-border trade in the continent.
ECIC, your export risk partner.